Hello, this is Gregor Steinbauer, and today I'm happy to share a conversation I had recently with my friend and conflict mediator, Daniel Aufdermauer. And in this 1-hour conversation, we had a really interesting discussion about the many ways we get stuck in conflict, and particularly also for men, how to practice to keep your heart open while really claiming your space and taking care of your boundaries. And I also shared a little process of my own in the conflict I was going through at the time with him, so to illustrate a bit the process. And you will notice that my audio at one point was not recording very well, which we only noticed afterwards, but we decided to share it anyway because the conversation was great and it picks up towards the end of the video. So I hope you enjoy the conversation and that you take good things out of it and back into your own life. Enjoy.
For me, there's always been, like, even less than what people do, I've always been interested in why people do what they do. So I've always been interested in underlying motivations. And specifically in conflict, I was always so struck by how much energy and effort we put into something that actually nobody likes. So this has been my main focus of learning for many years. And I will talk a bit about this, anyway today.
Beautiful. Yeah, just the line, something that nobody likes, I think is already a very powerful statement, because it's very true that nobody at the first hand seems to like conflict.
Yes.
At the other hand, there is nobody on this planet who has not experienced or is repeatedly experiencing conflict. So I think that's why it's such a vital point to explore it further. So I would just start to ask you, so what is conflict? How do you look at conflict as a mediator and in your work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And what happens often in my work is that people come to me and say, like, Daniel, we have a conflict. And I always wonder, where do you have it? Like, do you have it in your pocket? Do you carry it in your bag? You know, it's already the framing is like, we have something external, you know. And this is for me the starting point, that I feel conflict in itself is not a thing out there. It's something in here. And also looking from a neuroscientific perspective, and I just want to give like a very short framing of this, because this basically changes a lot of how I also learned how to approach conflict. And I know you work also a lot with on the level of the nervous system. And how I see it is that conflict is basically a crisis of the nervous system. And usually how this happens in the body, how I understand it, is that if we have emotions which are too overwhelming for us, like they are too strong for us to host in ourselves in a sustainable way, this is usually at the core of conflict. And when we look at the symptoms, for example, when there is what we call emotional overwhelm, the cortical parts of our brain shut down. So the more modern parts of our brain, they are connected to what we call the reptilian brain by a very weak neural connection. And this connection gets overloaded very fast when we have like intense emotional experiences. And then it's like a bad Wi-Fi connection. So in conflict, people don't have access to certain abilities which are more located in the cortical brain areas. And this is, for example, it's very hard for people to switch perspective. So it's very hard for me to imagine, okay, so how might this look from your side, and how might you look at this perspective? The second thing is that empathy is not readily available. That's also something that's located in in the cortical brain. It's also not possible for people to put what happens into a context. And you're not really able to kind of look at something in a collaborative and future-oriented way. And I usually tell people, so if this happens to you in conflict, this is not because you're not doing something right. This is actually really a mechanical issue in the brain. And this relaxes people generally because we know this happens to us. And the first thing we hear in conflict is what we should be doing, and especially what we should be doing better. And my first, also like something I stand for, is that if you meet somebody who is in conflict, if it's also your partner or somebody you're close to, don't tell them what they should be doing. They cannot hear it anyway. So what this means for them, it's an additional pressure besides being in a very intense emotional experience. They then have to really struggle to follow you on this kind of mental level. And they think how they feel usually is wrong because they hear what they should be doing. So my first, what I find very important is somebody comes to you in a conflict situation, don't tell them what they should be doing because anyway, they cannot hear it. Yes, and one other small thing I want to say about emotions is that I think many of us men have heard very early on that we shouldn't be emotional, or also that, yes, showing emotions is a weakness. Also, how I look at this from a neuroscientific level is that emotions only appear when something is important to you. That's actually the function of emotions. So emotions are our body's alarm system or notification system that tells you, hey, look, what's happening right now is really important. And the specific emotions give you specific, let's say, incentives or pathway of how to deal with it. And to just really highlight this, so emotions only appear in your nervous system when something is happening that's important to you. Exactly. So to bring this to complete the circle for this small input is at the core of every conflict is something that's really important to the person. And most of the time they don't know themselves what it is. But at the core of conflict, there is something that is really important for them, and they haven't been listened to, or they haven't been able to express. And if this happens for a long time, the only thing we can do is that we, in a way, scream for help. Yes. And maybe the third point, I think this is important for those of you who have also experienced escalated conflict. So if the emotional intensity in your body is strong for a long time, there is something that happens which is called projection. Sometimes used a bit loosely. I find it important that we are really precise, as you said, also with how the nervous system works. So if it becomes too intense in myself, I need to externalize my intensity. And this is already what children do, for those of you who are parents. If they cannot host an experience in themselves, they need the nervous system of an attuned parent to metabolize it and integrate it. And this is basically the emergency response of the body. And this is usually in conflict when people look at you and say, this is all your fault. This is the moment when the whole intensity gets put on you. And this is very intense and very uncomfortable. And we can talk a bit more later how to deal with this. But on a bit of a wider perspective, this is one of the last possible emergency responses of your body to help you with overwhelming emotions.
Oh yeah, thank you. I mean, there's already so many precious things you said now in there that we could talk for a good deal about all of this. But I want just to highlight, first of all, what you said also towards the end, that conflict brings something forward where something is really important to you. And I think that's already a very important point also in relating in a new way to conflict, because I know, and many other people also know, that I had to learn and to understand conflict myself in my life. Like I kind of implicitly, nobody told me that like this, but it kind of was evident from the environment where I grew up in, that when you have a conflict, actually something is wrong. And then of course, probably something's wrong with me, and that there is no value in conflict. And I think this is already when you say it's something important to the person that cannot be solved in a different way, so that there is a meaning and value and opportunity also in conflict when we're, and not something that inherently is going wrong. It just needs us to be there in a different way for that moment. And like you said, it's a crisis of the nervous system. It's very beautifully put, so that it's not just my incapacity or my wrongness, but it's a situation of overwhelm that has not found another capacity to bring what is important into the relationship. Really.
Exactly, and if I can say something to this, so there is, there is a very, I would also say for me, there is a paradigm shift happening slowly, that we see conflict as functional. So on the level of this very effective mindset of getting results fast, conflict is not functional. This is also a lot to do with how modern society works. And I agree with you completely. So there is this shift of perspective to say, conflict is in a way functional. It calls attention to something that has not been heard for a long time. And on the other hand, or like at the same time, people sometimes ask me, okay, so is it only, how can I be understanding of somebody who's really hurting me? Because if somebody is very much projecting onto you, if somebody is really in an escalated situation, it takes a lot of availability to really take that, because the projecting energy can be really strong. I mean, many of us know this. You're just sitting at home, you're quite happy, and then somebody comes in, maybe your partner, and you just get this energetic hit of the projection. This can be really strong. So I find in conflict, there's a really important balance between availability and receptivity, and really trying to listen deeper to the other person. And also a skill that I find is something that's not so much here yet, is what I call open-hearted confrontation. So how can I tell somebody, look, what's happening right now is not okay for me. I want to set a clear boundary. And at the same time, I am here with you in also what's hard for you. So that's the balance that I am finding more and more. And maybe we can get to talk about this a bit later in detail. I just want to include this right from the beginning. So conflict, also responding to conflict, is very much a balance of saying yes and no. Yes. Does that make sense to you?
Totally. That's also something how I address it. Like, it has this, you need both powers in your life.
Exactly.
Capacity to agree, to say yes, to join. That ideally comes out of a mature place, because if you say yes too often, then it's out of the fear of losing the contact that is vital, especially when we touch our early childhood wounds. So that there's a big difference of how and from which place I say yes. That includes the capacity to say also no, like to set the boundary. And to do that within, like, I love this open-hearted confrontation, is a huge art, because we all know that when I'm in the middle of it, and I fully include myself in here, and I'm in the middle of something that's overwhelming, and I might not even fully notice that. I think I'm just right, and my partner is wrong. Then I might still set a boundary, but it might not come from an open heart, but just from blame, or from fear, from anger, from all the things that we know get triggered in situations like this. Or I'm too afraid of actually speaking it out, and I kind of hang in and listen too long, but actually have withdrawn on my inside already since a long while, which will have consequences later on for sure.
Yes, and they're very much like this distinction that you say, like, so, okay, and this is what I call, so what is the actual motivation, you know, so which place does my behavior or my action come from? And I have like this, something I use often is to make the differentiation between a reaction and a response. And so the reaction is basically, reaction is a behavior that comes before you can fully feel how you feel in the moment. And the response is a behavior that comes after or as you fully feel how you feel. And this makes all the difference, you know. In conflict, usually you only have reactions. And again, the function of reaction is to protect yourself and to kind of make, like you want to make go away what is, so you want to stop feeling the intensity of what you're feeling. Whereas a response is, I integrate how I am, you can stay present with this, and out of this you can address what is necessary to be done in that moment. And that's a very different quality. So you will know people, you will know when somebody's responding and when somebody's reacting. Because when somebody's reacting, there's no availability for you in it. It's all about them. And this, I would say, is actually all the difference. And what I'm trying to do is also, first of all, for myself to continue to learn how can I respond more, and also to put this more in a global context. And I feel this is a really big issue. For example, also in politics, you know, in politics it's just one reaction after the other. So yeah, there's a much wider context to this.
Right. Great. Just as you said, this is something, of course, we could go into many, many details and how this applies even to the global stage. And for the conversation here, I'd like to, for a moment, bring it back to this more personal place. And also, like, this is a project or a work that we're aiming to understand, let's say, men, not only speaking to men, but also to women, but understand a bit the lives of men, maybe in a different way. So I would come back at you with the question. So when you're thinking of men nowadays living in the world that we're in, what would you say is important that men living today need to know or hear about conflict?
Yes, that's a very good question, and I'm also looking in myself as you ask this. Okay, so so I would like to come back to this, what I call open-hearted confrontation. So what I see also often, actually what I see often in relationships, like when I do, for example, mediations in families or within intimate relationships, I actually see often men who are a bit too understanding. And this is a bit what you said. So I see many men, and not always, you know, this is a bit different from depending on the context of where you come from, but I also do see many men, because many of us had also fathers where there was not so much emotional availability. I see many men who are interested in developing emotional availability because also they have not had it themselves. So this, I feel, is a very beautiful motivation. However, often in intimate relationships, I feel that I see men going a bit too far. You know, it's a bit this feeling of leaning forward, where I feel somehow they don't feel the permission to stand also in a clarity of saying no. Or also when you say that there's sometimes a fear that I see that if I'm not so emotionally available, I will lose the connection. So there's something very interesting in this for me there. And then I also see sometimes men who are in a very strong clarity. However, I'm not sure if they are connected with their partners in that clarity. So these are the two polarities that I meet. And I feel both are necessary. And this is why I come back to the open-hearted confrontation. I feel as men, there is this ability, or in the masculine energy, there is this ability to be very clear and to also to address things, to call out something where you say this is not okay. So I do feel that is also a responsibility of the masculine. And I feel it's not helpful, or it does not really land if we don't also accept the responsibility of then staying with what are the effects of that clarity. And that's really also feeling myself when we talk about this. There is somehow, I would say this is transgenerational, there is something ambivalent about this, which I very much, so I anyway love a lot ambivalence. So I also try to invite a lot ambivalence into any kind of conflict dialogue. So this is a leading edge also for me in the work of conflict, especially how I meet it in men. Does this make any sense to you from your perspective?
Totally. And it's actually very beautiful the way you describe also, like there's many points, also a historical development of where men, like say more in the Western world, are in now as a trend that we're maybe trying to integrate something that was before not there, where men were either disconnected or dominant, to bring in this capacity to relate. And I also like what you said, because I see this a lot, the first maybe hidden cost of being too understanding or being too accommodating. Because this I see a lot when I work with couples, where they come in, where this cost suddenly becomes visible, where you say like, now, okay, now I've had it. I've listened and listened. I've tried. I've been there. I try to be a good man and all of these things. Or it can be from the female side, from the woman's side, the very same thing. But suddenly you can't anymore, where it touches a boundary or it crosses a threshold, and then it's done with generosity, and then it shifts gears, and then it becomes very like you have to kind of rewind a lot of stories that happened until that point. And what I want to come back to is also, so you talk about I find it beautiful, like open-hearted confrontation in the men's work that I do. I would call this this is a mature masculine embodiment of strength and love, where I'm simultaneously rooted in my capacity to stand for myself and know what I want, and honor, which brings dignity. I honor where I am and where my boundaries are, what I can do and what I can't do. And at the same time, I'm simultaneously also attuned or have the capacity to know what my stance creates for you, which doesn't mean I have to take care of you.
Yes.
But I can be aware of you, which creates a very different energetic field. It's not like I have to accommodate you that you didn't feel pain by what I'm saying, but I am aware that this may cause pain for you. And that already changes the thing. However, this is high art.
It is, actually.
It is high
exactly.
art. And it's beautiful when it's possible. But so the question, and it's good to have that as a kind of a guiding star. This is where we can't, because I think it's our innate capacity as men and as human beings. So my question would be then, and I know this from myself, we all probably know this to some degree. We've read stuff. Everybody that listens to this probably has done and practiced all kind of things, which is great. And still you meet your place where you're forget it, or you just don't want it, and so what's the, like, you're going for the conflict, or you pull out of the conflict. So I would like to ask you, so what are the things that you see are important to practice, either right in the moment when you are in a conflict or moving towards escalation, what you can do there? Like, what's the emergency brake solutions that don't further the conflict, but maybe gives it a different possibility to change the tracks of something that otherwise leads to catastrophe? And even more, what are things that you can develop for yourself when you're not in the middle of something, but that builds building blocks that maybe support you the next time you enter the zone of conflict, or yeah, dispute, disagreement, because there's early warning signs, I think, also before we call it conflict.
Yes, wow, those are a lot of questions.
Yes, please, in 1 minute, give us all.
No problem. And I will give you two answers. So I will give you a practical answer in a second. As a first answer, I want to again just see, like, okay, so what's happening when we are trying to find solutions for conflict? Because I find this in itself is there's always sometimes an interesting urgency to this. So for example, when I do trainings, often people come and say, okay, so now what do I do? What can I do? And I usually take a very long time, and it frustrates a lot of people who say, I'm not going to give you solutions. Because the first thing that we need to do is we need to sink into the fact that conflict is a part of our life. And this, I feel, so this is also a collective thing that somehow we get quite fast when we talk about what can I do, so da-da-da. And again, also in this aspect, I'm interested in the motivation. Is this a reaction where we feel like, oh shit, we cannot really handle the intensity of conflict, so let's get it over with as efficiently as possible? Or does this come from a breathing out response and saying, yes, this is here, this happens collectively, it happens in very brutal ways right now as you and I are speaking? And how much of this can I let myself be touched by, as we then see what kind of possibilities do we have to address this? Does this make sense to you, this framing?
Totally. I just want to maybe give it a moment to breathe again when you say that we need to sink into the reality that conflict is part of our life. And there's no way to not have it, but rather to find the capacity in myself that acknowledges that I have it, that it is here. It's very beautiful.
And I feel with this sinking comes suddenly an availability of the heart to then see, and I'm also hurting people who are close to me through my conflict behavior. And this, I feel, is such a necessary step to acknowledge this first, So the first step in every also mediation that I do, or when we do bigger conflict transformations, is to really sharpen and work out the differences, So if people want to, much too soon, people want to come together because we also have not learned to tolerate ambiguity or to stand a bit apart. And usually what I really say, there's a very beautiful poem from Khalil Gibran, which says that somehow in a mature relationship, we have enough space between the two of us that the winds of heaven can blow through. And I feel I often meet conflict always means that people are very entangled. Then they want to find a fast solution for this. And the first solution is that we rest and take like a step back and see like how far apart we are in these moments. So that's, and I think this is really the foundation for any conflict work. Yeah. Okay, so this was very important to me to not kind of blindly jump. And I'm amazed, and I really want to highlight this. I'm amazed that also with, so this I find on every level of conflict resolution, also on international. So this temptation to reach for shiny solutions is very, very strong. Yes, and I feel like I always say there's a difference. So don't fall in love with shiny solutions, like with solutions that look good. Like wait until new, like there needs to be a sinking, and suddenly new perspectives become available. And you see this actually when you work with people, and afterwards we can do a practical exercise. You see this sometimes they come to me and they talk about their conflict, and you see in their eyes they are not here. They are in this so much in this inner turmoil, and there's such a struggle. And when you help them breathe, so one thing that how I sometimes use as a metaphor for my work is I kind of have a big oxygen tank, these scuba tanks on my back, and I walk around and I just try to put the breathing mask onto people so that they can actually breathe. When you help them breathe, and this means really when you help them regulate their inner intensity through your own nervous system, suddenly they come online again, and you see in their eyes, suddenly they see you again. It's a very different, I don't know if you know this also from your coaching and counseling work. And then you can start to look at what you do together. But before that, there is no together. There is just survival. And this gets shortcutted in a vast majority of also conflict transformation processes. This gets shortcutted. So we try to jump into a kind of a together solution much too fast before we have not even explored how much we are actually standing apart and how much we are actually not seeing each other. Yes, so that's very important for me in my work, that we don't recreate this over and over again. Okay, so this as a first kind of framing. Do you want to say something to that, or shall we do a little exercise?
Yeah, maybe let's make it. Let's go into an exercise with this. I think there's a lot to explore.
So something that you can do very practically, and I will say something also a bit later when this is appropriate and when not, is sometimes. So this is what I call the loop of understanding, and this is part of what's generally said, like what's generally subsumed under deep listening. And this comes back to what we said before: is that if somebody is activated or agitated emotionally, my job is to be available and actually to become interested in what is it actually that's so important to you. And we can do this as a little exercise. So I will ask you that in a few moments you share maybe a situation that you have in your life where you feel you're a bit in the early stages of a conflict. Doesn't need to be something huge right now. And what I will do is I will very soon stop you with my hand, and then I will repeat what I heard. And I won't repeat the words word by word mentally. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm really looking into myself and see like what has actually landed in me and what hasn't. And then I will feed you back what I heard, and then you can check if this is what you actually meant. It sounds super simple. It's extremely powerful. Yeah, and maybe we try this for a few minutes, and then people will also see what this is like. Is that good for you?
Great. Let's dive.
Okay, good. So what's something that you have currently in your life where you feel you're a bit maybe stuck or there's a conflict?
Right. I think I would bring in a situation where I'm in a team, or like I'm leading a project and there's a team around me and I'm the leader, let's say, but there's not very strong hierarchies, but there are clarity of hierarchies.
Okay. So what I heard is that you're working in a project where there is a team, And I'm not sure if I understood if you're a leader or if you're not a leader.
I'm the leader.
Okay. So I heard that you're working on a project with a team and you are leading the team.
Right.
Okay.
And what I added is that those roles are clear. And in the reality, the way we work together, the roles are not, the hierarchies are not very strict. So there is also a lot of cooperation there in the team.
Okay. So what I hear or what lands in me is that on paper, the role is clear that you are the leader. And I didn't quite understand how it is in real life.
Right. That's the place where we enter the difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
So there is also, due to original setup of the project, there is also there's a strong cooperation, and all there are 4 people in the team, are bringing in important aspects to the project.
Okay, so what I hear is that a core part of this project is about cooperation, and
it's more how the project got set up. It's not the core part of in one way, yes, but it's not the main aspect of the teamwork.
Okay, fair enough. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I hear that you came together as a cooperation, or this was the coming together was born out of an intention to cooperate. And I don't yet understand what the problem is in a way.
We're not there yet. The problem is with one specific person in the team where I feel there is like a underlying power struggle where my role as the leader of the team is formally accepted, but by the actions and subliminal messages being kind of, like you say in German, like when you kind of saw on the chair of the leader, it's like where there's a power struggle or a drive, or also crossing boundaries of competencies or agreements, and it makes me angry.
Okay. Yeah, so what I hear is that so I hear that you're angry.
Yes.
Yes. And I hear that
it's fair to say angry, and there's also a part that's scared.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I hear the anger and also the fear. And I heard that with one person specifically from the team, you experience him or her as challenging your position. Yeah. So that you hear one of the team members is not happy with you as a leader.
Yes, I'm not sure. It's more not happy with his role.
Okay.
With his role.
Yes. So this lands a lot in me. So I do hear that you experience this person as not being happy in his or her role as being not the leader. Yeah. Good. How is this for you?
Yeah, it's quite clear. That's very much, at least how I see it now.
Mm-hmm. And how is it for you with what we just did? So how do you experience yourself in this pacing that we did together?
Yeah, it's interesting now. It's even more clear now. It's like stripped down to the essentials. And what was super interesting, helpful, and at the first moment annoying when I was starting to explain the situation, I was like ready to give my rap.
Of
And then
course.
you say stop, and I'm like, okay.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's beautiful that you say this, because that what you say, like, I want to give my side of the story. This is already the pent up energy, you know, like I say, this is the bit the dynamite that we collected. And what I use, so I feel is very strongly often in my body and also in the other person, that there at some point there is like this, yes, this is how it is. So there is this really breathing out of the nervous system. I also feel like your shoulders are a bit more down, you know. So this is what we're looking for in this kind of work. I'm not at all in one way interested in the content. I'm trying to help you metabolize your experience. And now I feel we could actually have a talk about, okay, so what do you need? What are the options? You know, now we could go into the constructive part, but it needs this cooling down. And it's my job as a listener to help you cool down. And this is what you know very well. This is what we call co-regulation. And I find this loop of understanding, this technique is super simple, but extremely powerful. And this is something that you can really try also at home or with your friends. With your partner, it's hard, also when it's already escalated. So I wouldn't advise to trying that there first. And I want to highlight one thing, you know, so what I usually ask people in the workshops, okay, so what did you see me do or not do? And they say, you didn't, they usually say two things. They say that they experience me as being genuinely interested, which I am. And I'm not doing this for you. You know, conflict resolution is never for the other person. I'm doing it because I want to understand for myself what's important to you. And this is my interest. So this is why I look so much into myself and see, okay, because I don't want to kind of just repeat what you said. I want to hear, how is this touching me? So there's a person here that anyway I appreciate a lot. What's going on? And I can support you by really being with a lot of integrity, looking into myself. So the availability is key. And I feel like if you're not available, don't do it. This is why conflict transformation is, every time you do it with this really deep kind of availability, it's an act of love. Because you're available for somebody else, or your availability supports someone else. And if you're not available, then don't do it, and point the person to a person who is available.
Right.
And that takes a lot of also inner, and then we come back again also as men. So yeah, sometimes maybe you're not available and you're afraid of hurting the other person. And there's a genuine way of saying, look, I am not, I cannot be here in this form for you, but we can look together who you could talk to. So there's different options there. And the other thing I want to say is so people say like, Daniel, you're not presenting solutions. Yes, which I'm not. So the last thing you need to do in conflict transformation is offer solutions, at least in the beginning, because that's not the point, the first stages of conflict transformation. And it's really important, the pacing, also the slowing down. As you say, people get usually a bit irritated at first, and this is something that is you kind of, so in your availability, you are able to meet this. And what we actually do is we restore the right order of emotional processes, because in conflict, the right order of emotional processes is disturbed. So we kind of put your emotional experience again in the right order, and this usually has a great relaxing effect on people, and it's the foundation that's necessary so that we can at all look at next solutions. And the last thing to say on this for me is, it's amazing if you really help people metabolize and integrate their experience. Most of the time they present their own solutions. So mediation as a classical form is really built on that you never bring any solutions, you just help build this foundation. And it's so beautiful what people come up with by themselves if you listen to them long enough. And there is a disclaimer. So this is really a beginning. So this is not, so the loop of understanding is the core tool in conflict transformation. There's also many other steps necessary. So don't be disappointed if this will not solve all of your problems in life. It's a great tool to start with, and especially to train your own availability. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so I have this very beautiful, and I have two questions that follow on this. So the first is to make it even more practical, or to highlight what you said about finding the right place to practice this in the right context. So what I hear you say is when you are already in a heated conflict, don't try to do that, to offer that or ask that for the other. And then, so what is the right place? Let's say I have a conflict like now in my situation, and maybe I don't feel that's the right moment to bring it into direct dialogue. So how can people practice this? It's my question right now. What's
That's a good question.
Practical application of this?
So this you can maybe first practice, with friends. Sometimes we sit there, we meet somebody, and then somebody comes and tells you about, this and that is happening in my life. And you can just sometimes let this flow a bit into your conversation. You go like, okay, so I hear that this and this happened. I didn't hear who did what. So this can be really something you weave into your life. Exactly. For a start, I would say this is really good, for example, with friends. And I would say the defining guide for yourself is, okay, so how available am I actually? So the thing is, in escalated conflicts, you anyway want to, so there's always a deeper motivation that you only listen to the other. So in the end, they will finally listen to you. So, and that's like, this is not, so with this, you will use up credit.
Right. Can I ask just a question on that? So how can I recognize, because I might think, oh, I'm super available and I want to listen, but actually maybe I'm not. This is a reactivity or a learned response, or learned defense. So how can I notice if I'm actually available or not?
That's a very good question. And thank you for pinpointing this so much. So one thing is, I feel like the one thing that you can develop is, so how tense am I in my body in the interaction that I'm in? So the more tense you are, the less available you are. And it's really good to check always my urgency, So there's like the tension of the body, that is a very good guideline. It's the urgency you feel. And it's like this checking how much does actually the other person have a space to land in me? So how much am I actually seeing the other person? So those are a bit the guidelines. And especially, often we need people. So often we need conflicts to show us our own limits. So again, I'm not saying it is necessarily bad, but if you feel you just had the conversation and you walk out after the conversation, you feel like, look, I don't remember the other person at all. I don't remember anything that landed in me. This can give you like a moment to pause and say like, oh, okay, so that's interesting, So again, conflicts are also a very useful reminder of life to tell you, hey, here you need support. And sometimes this is why I'm saying they're not intrinsically bad. What is bad is if for a longer period of time, you don't look for adequate support.
Right.
This is your responsibility. So if once or two, if sometimes conflicts happen, or people get activated, or you disagree, or even you fight a bit, okay, I don't feel that's such a bad thing in itself. What is not okay is if you then don't take your responsibility to see like, okay, so how was I actually there or not? How much was I in the same room or with the other person? And this is really good to reflect, for example, with friends, especially with the loop of understanding. This is basically a lot of the work that I do. Right. Tell me if I'm not giving you a precise.
No, that's very clear, and I would just maybe add, because seeing this from experience a lot, also more men doing that you're thinking you're very available, and maybe you don't even feel tense, but you actually feel very disconnected from, like, you're in a heated argument,
And then you see people like, yeah, no, I'm listening, I'm fine. I don't have, and they maybe really don't notice their tension.
You're right.
Because they're in a, like a, in their part of the nervous system that has shut down, and you don't, and you might even think you're cool, but cool is really cold.
Yes.
In the sense of not being available to what's actually maybe going on, to how disturbed the other person feels. So if you feel that, if you think you're cool, that doesn't mean that you're available, because the other person will not meet a person that's interested. It will meet a critical parent or a cold block of ice, and that probably just drives the reactivity on the other side even further up.
Yes, and that's very precise how you describe this. And I would also say maybe two more things. One thing is really that, like already when you step into conversation with somebody, it's always just also what we did before, so you ask me for solutions and what can we do? And so like we always check a bit, okay, so how do I feel here before we actually start doing something? And this, I think, is really necessary also in this modern kind of life that we're leading, where there's so much emotional stimulation everywhere, like in tradition. So in the old traditions, there was much more time and space for emotional integration, also with spirituality, also with collective rituals. And all of this we don't have anymore. So we are anyway living in a time, also politics, for example, basically a lot of politics is emotional activation. So this really needs to start with the mindfulness of saying, yes, okay, especially with the people I love, I will more and more take a moment to let like the light in, or to and this I usually say is also part of conflict transformation practice, which is connected for me to a deep spirituality. It's always like also for me, when I'm in very strong escalated situations, people ask me, Daniel, how is this not exhausting for you? How can you go out in the evening and feel energized in a good way? And I feel there needs to be a practice of something where I call like you need to feel the ground that is always there and the window that is always open. And I think this I feel is usually like a start is a mindfulness practice. This can then go on into a deeper meditation practice. And all the mediators I know have over time a very strong spiritual practice, because you need to have a window that's always open. And this is your responsibility, So this is something you do for yourself. And this I also know is very much something you do in your work. And especially for men, I so love the title of one of your projects where you say like restoring dignity. A lot of, I think, why also for us men, we sometimes cannot listen is because we have been humiliated, or we don't remember our dignity. And I also feel many men haven't had like a healthy form of competition when they were younger with their parents, or with their fathers, where they could especially like really test the limits of their strength. So I see also a lot like when men are empowered in feeling their strength, they then tend to be also a bit like too strong also towards their partners. So there's a lot of again, so there's a lot to conflict, and I think I'm just happy when these little windows open just a bit more. And also the talk here. So again, I don't want to focus so much on the solutions. What I hope that some of you can take away from this is just the feeling that, now there's a talk about conflict where actually we start to breathe a bit more. So as we do this, your nervous system already gets like a new reference point of what's possible. And this is an embodied learning. Yeah. So I feel like, again, so already when you enter into contact with somebody, that you kind of practice this mindfulness of seeing, so how am I already entering, and am I already thinking of what I want to put onto, like to unload on the other person, or can I actually just rest for a moment in that we are here together? And one last thing to say is sometimes people come together much too fast. And that's already a sign of trauma. That's already a sign of escalated conflict. So can we just take a moment to maybe start a bit further apart and just slowly breathe into our connection? And then you are setting the foundation for everything that comes afterwards.
Right. Yeah, thank you for this. So there's so many golden nuggets in there, and also for bringing in this bigger dimension, also like this picture of like we need to keep one window a little bit open. It's very beautiful. And so I see we're coming towards the end of the time here. There'll be 100 more questions on my list.
There are.
I still would like to ask you one thing, and normally I would like to ask you to give us one practical tip what people, man, listening to this can do right now. But in a way, you gave that to us already. So I'd like to give you another question, which is not solution oriented, but maybe it is. So let's say you're in a conflict and you know it's because I believe we all know that we are in a place that has now the possibility, the train set up to escalation is already, it's already there. So what would you say, what are the best ways to escalate the conflict? If you want to make sure that this goes to hell now, what do you have to do?
Question. I haven't heard that question before. I like that. Yeah, so this I really liked. This is very different direction. I'm not even sure what to answer you, which is amazing for myself. So one thing I would say, so one thing that comes to me is like, if you hit hard and fast, then you're going to escalate, you know? So, I mean, that's a bit, so hitting hard and hitting fast is already escalation. So if you feel also, you know, not even like on a physical level, but if you feel you come with this energy and you just want to offload something hard and fast, then you're on the track to escalation. And again, if the less you're interested in the other person, the more you're going towards escalation.
This is perfect. The less you're interested in the other person.
The less that you're genuinely interested in the other person and how a lot of what the other person is saying and doing has to do more with you than you think. That's usually what I also say, like conflict has much more to do with you than you think generally.
That's beautiful.
So the less you're interested in also, so the less that you're interested in the integrity of the other person and the less that you're interested in what all of this might actually mean for you in your life, the more you're headed towards escalation. And I feel also sometimes in relationships when I do couple mediation, I usually just ask people from the beginning, like, hey, do you actually want to be together or not? And if you don't want to be together, be clear. And this is also, I think, yeah, so again, you don't have to be interested in somebody else, but if you're not, then be honest about it and take what it means that maybe then somebody says, okay, thank you for your clarity. And this means I cannot be in this contact and I choose to walk away. Yeah, so be clear about that. And as you said, always check also your integrity. What is the motivation for not being interested in somebody? So that's again a tightrope walk. Yeah, but that's what I can say for now.
That's cool. I hear it, especially now with this point of the less I'm interested in the other or even myself. Exactly. So the less I'm interested, I have an openness, when my curiosity is completely gone or I shut down my curiosity, I'm surely to strengthen my reactivity and then therefore escalation. I think that's a very good ending point for this.
Yeah, and thank you. That's an amazing question. I've really never thought about it this way.
Yeah, because I do that. I ask couples that a lot, and people know immediately what they're doing, you know, and then sometimes is as subtle as just using this kind of facial expressions, you know, when your partner starts to speak and you roll your eyes and it's like, and it goes in milliseconds.
Yes. And one thing that I want to add to this is like, and if there is not interest, there are, usually this means people are too close together. And actually also I often ask couples like, okay, so what is the appropriate distance? And like, if you give a bit space, and as I said, when the winds of heaven can blow between you, you know, this relaxes, then you put them a bit out, like you take people out of the tension, they start to feel more themselves, and then they can reconnect again. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Great.
All right. Thank you, Daniel, for this really inspiring conversation. We'll need to have 100 more of those.
Yes, let's do that. And thank you so much also.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, and maybe just as a last point, if you want to let listeners know how they can find you, or any way they can work with you or learn from you, is there anything you'd like to give us information out to the people listening in?
Yeah, so if you listen to this and you feel you're interested also in learning this kind of conflict transformation, either for yourself or then also as a facilitator, I continuously do trainings, which I very much love to do. We do these deep dive trainings. And there is one at the end of February 2021. For example, if you're interested in that, we have still some slots available. And you can find any information on my website, which is www.aufdermauer.name. And you can also Google me. If you Google Daniel Remigius Aufdermauer, you will find my website. And I'm very happy for anybody who's interested. And anyway, for all of us, also the work that you do, how we are, you know, approaching important topics from different directions. I think that's exactly what is necessary in the times that we live in. Yes, and thank you so much for having me, and also for the friendship that we have had for a long time. I very much appreciate what we're doing together also as men.
So thank you, Daniel. Thank you for your time and your generosity, and
you're welcome. Ciao.
Ciao.